everyone. Vienna is calling. My name is Eleonore and welcome to ICC Austria Talks Trade Finance. This episode today is part of our Trade Finance Week and focuses on letters of credit education, a subject that is not only close to our hearts, but also to that of our exclusive media partner, Trade Finance Global, whom we thank very much for their support. As you know, ICC Austria has been hosting its annual flagship Trade Finance Conference Week for more than a decade, closer to 2. And we are very, very honored and pleased to have so many fans around the world. However, some of you may have not been able to join us this year. And those who do may crave some more after today's session. So here we go. When I joined the trade finance world 10 years ago, one of the most recurring questions and statements I encountered was letters of credit are dead. 10 years from now, no one will use letters of credit anymore. Obviously, that's not the case. However, this prediction did not arise out of nowhere. And the most common reasoning behind it was that the usage of LCs became way too complicated. Since I'm not a banker, but a lawyer working for the International Chamber of Commerce, I wondered if that statement is true, and given so, what we as a community can do about it. With that in mind, I invited two of the most seasoned experts in the trade finance world to talk about that subject. Please welcome with me, and they do not need a further introduction, the legendary Don Smith and the very famous, or should I say infamous, Hugo Verschoren. Hello guys, and welcome to ICC Austria Talks Trade Finance.
Good day, everyone, all over the world. Well, today we're going to look at the question that we asking ourselves for years now. How long will this vehicle called letter of credit keep chugging along? If we look at the current situation of the letters of credit, you can find more details in ICC's global survey on trade finance. ICC is issuing every year a global survey on trade finance. And the last figures, look at them there on the screen, you can find them. The figures about MT700 and MT400 messages in SWIFT are going down. This is already the case since 20 years now. If you would look at the figure 20 years ago, it would be much higher, and well, the slope was even steeper at that time. Why? Well, people like Don and I have been trying to ask this question for many years now, and we think we found the answers why, but we didn't find the solutions. Why? Well, first of all, there's the complexity of the instrument. This instrument is enormously complex. There's a lot of legislation, etc. Don will talk to you about that in a minute. And also discrepancies and discussions. Certainly exporters are trying to run away from this instrument as soon as they can, as soon as they don't need it anymore. Why? Well, because there's a lot of discrepancies. Why? Because of the complexity of the instrument, etc. Why is this done?
Well, you know, letters of credit are complex, and I don't think buyers and sellers, and frankly, even bankers, really understand everything about letters of credit. So if the bankers are not familiar with them, and the corporates, both the buyers and the sellers, are not really familiar with them, and we look at whose business is the buying and selling, well, the buying and selling is the job of the buyers and sellers, the corporates, the customers, the applicants for the letters of credit, and the beneficiaries for the letter of credit. Banks aren't part of the buying and selling. So it must be something other than the banks and the businesses. Let's take a look at the rules. The rules for letters of credit, commercial letters of credit, import and export letters of credit. The publication by the International Chamber of Commerce has 39 articles and is 34 pages in length. And think about it for a moment. Who writes these rules? The International Chamber of Commerce Banking Commission. Well, who are the members of the International Chamber of Commerce Banking Commission? Why, it's bankers. And bankers, therefore, are writing the rules for letters of credit because letters of credit are a bank obligation. But there must be more than that. In order to understand what these 39 articles really mean, the International Chamber of Commerce has another publication, International Standard Banking Practices. And that publication tells us that it is to be read in conjunction with the rules. So we have 34 pages of rules on 39 articles, and oh my gosh, look at this. The International Standard Banking Practices has 200 paragraphs on 97 pages explaining the 39 articles of the UCP 600. Wait a minute, there's something wrong here. How do we figure out when there's a problem if we've got all of these rules and all of these explanations of the rules? Why would there be problems? And how do we figure out how to solve the problems? Well, then we have things called ICC opinions, and then we have ICC DocDex decisions. And if you look at your screen, those are all publications and resources that buyers and sellers and bankers can use in order to understand the complexity and the rules and how letters of credit are actually used. My question then is, why do we have all of these things trying to do something that helps buyers and sellers sell their products and get paid for their products? Why are these things so complex? Well, let's look at the complexity of the instrument itself. We're talking here about banks who use both manual and automated processes in order for the banks and the corporates to get this business done. It requires access to the rules, the ICC opinions, and the DocDex decisions in order to educate ourselves. But those publications are rather expensive. And then we have different concepts of what it means. And the word honor and the word negotiation are in the rules and are in the explanations, but it's hard for corporates who are not bankers to understand what those words, honor and negotiation, mean, and the entire concept behind those words, because the letter of credit is an obligation of the bank. It's not the buyer's obligation. It's not the seller's obligation. And then we come back to, well, what happens if there's a problem with the documents and I've gotten paid, but as the seller, the bank comes back to me and says, oh, wait a minute, I want that money back because there's a problem in the documents. And I'll say, well, that's your problem because I've been paid. And then the bank will say, well, no, not really. We negotiated, and we negotiated with recourse. So that means we can get the money back. So what does that lead to? It leads to many, many documents that are superfluous, documents that are useless, are not necessary. things like drafts, things like packing lists in a day of containerized shipment and a day of bulk cargo shipment. Why do we need packing lists? Think about the things that go into the discussions about strict compliance and conflict of data. What does strict compliance really mean? And what does conflict of data really mean when you're looking at documents? And then, perhaps because of this complexity, many parties, corporations as well as banks, are abusing a letter of credit instrument and making it an instrument of non-payment instead of an instrument of payment. How do we know? Because 60% of documents are discrepant on the first presentation. They have a problem that stops the bank from being able to make the immediate payment.
The issue of useless documents reminds me of an anecdote of a few years ago. People in the bank I was working with showed me a letter of credit that was coming in from an Arab country for the export of race horses from Belgium to an Arab country, and export of race horses. One of the documents requested was a packing list. How stupid can you be? Well, the people ask themselves, well, is there a need for creation of something else? And a letter of credit Lite, a Lite LC product. Well, the Institute of International Banking Law and Practice, who organizes LC surveys from time to time, did surveys in Eastern, in Asia and the Pacific, and in the West. And well, you see the blue part of the pie. Says about 60% of people says yes, document credits are not a problem. More education and guidance on their proper usage is the answer. I'm tending towards the green part of the pie. Yes, documentary credits have gotten too complex. A new simplified Lite product is needed. Well, education. First of all, education. Banks should train their clients in letters of credit basics. What is a letter of credit? How does it work? Completing the application form, the basics of creating documents. I mean, I've talked to lots of corporates, and even the salespeople in corporates, they got from their boss, they say, well, if you sell to that country and that country, you will have to do it by letters of credit. But nobody told those salespeople what is a letter of credit. So they're happy to have a contract which shows payment by means of a letter of credit, and that's it. And then only it starts. Banks should train also their staff in issuance, amendments, document examination, and how credits and trade really work. And that is in some banks a problem, because the staff, a lot of the staff doing their jobs, issuance, amendments, and document examination, are offshored or outsourced to other countries where they are not close to the customers and where they don't see the full picture of how a trade really works. Banks should visit and, where necessary, train freight forwarders like they should train their clients. I've seen a lot of freight forwarders who offer services to their customers, providing them the service to draw up documents under letters of credit. But those poor freight forwarders don't know what a letter of credit is. So if you got the option to do it, please do it. Train forwarders, freight forwarders as well. They will be happy, and they will be thankful for you forever.
Yeah, but wait a minute.
Yeah.
You know, there's a problem with saying that the banks should visit and train freight forwarders like they train their clients. The freight forwarder's job is to get the goods, get the freight moved from the seller's location to the buyer's location. Mm-hmm. Why do freight forwarders have to be involved in these stupid things called letters of credit?
Oh, because then they should know why this stupid bill of lading needs a mention on board instead of received for shipment. And then they know how, because there's freight forwarders, besides moving goods from one part of the world to another or arranging for that. They also offer, they draw up documents for even invoices for their customer, bills of lading, certificates of origin. They have some have a full documentation service for their customers. So they should need to know what they are exactly doing when doing this.
Okay, so looking at education, banks need to train their own staff.
Yeah.
Then banks need to train their clients.
Yeah.
And then banks need to train the freight forwarders.
Yeah.
Man, this sounds like this sounds like a university education.
Yeah, but who's going to do it if banks don't do it? Remember, this is a banking product. Who draws up the rules? That's banks sitting in the Banking Commission of the International Chamber of Commerce. There's no one else who perhaps is able to do this. And it's also in the bank's own interest. If we still want to work with this product for years, we have to do something. Otherwise, this instrument will not survive the next decades, I'm afraid.
Sounds awfully complex to me.
Yeah. It is, yeah, it is. And not that many banks do it. I was in a lucky position that within my bank for a few years, I was able to do this, and I trained staff and I trained customers. I even trained freight forwarders all over the world. So indeed, and that should be done. I mean, it's also in the bank's own interest as well, because if you receive as a bank documents are not correct, well, so much with your straight through processing, you will have to put the file aside. You have to call the customer, wait for documents to be corrected, etc. So as long as documents are correct, it's much more in the interest of banks than you should think. Increase access to UCP and ISBP 745 for applicants, beneficiaries, forwarders, and bankers. I know I've visited a lot of countries all over the world, also in Africa. And if you talk about UCP 600, they know what you're talking about. But ISBP 745, no, never heard of it. This should change, but those publications are way too expensive for a lot of bankers, let alone corporates and buyers and sellers. A greater understanding of the ISBP would help alleviate the problems and greatly reduce the vast number of discrepancies in documents. It has already helped introduction, but now more people need to know what ISBP with the explanation of the rules is all about. And it is very clear that significant attention must be paid to distribution of an indication in, well, what is an international standard banking practice? I mean, in that booklet, there are a few things said, but there are a lot of other things that can be considered as being international standard banking practice, for example. You should know a lot of things more than that. You should know that there's some countries that are bilingual. You should know that how the Port of New York works, for example, that there are some places in the Port of New York that are not in the city or the state of New York, etc., etc. This is international standard banking practice. And why it exists, and this is a key issue moving forward. If we want to do this, if we want to continue with this instrument, we need to do a lot about education.
You know, I agree with you, and I think part of the problem is that buyers and sellers and banks are all using this complex document called a letter of credit, but each of us have different goals. The buyers want to make sure that they get the right merchandise and they receive it on time. And the sellers want to make sure that they are getting paid for selling the merchandise and they get their payment on time. And banks, well, we all need to remember that the letter of credit is actually an obligation by the issuing bank. And the issuing bank must pay if the documents are correct. And then after they've paid, they turn around and debit their client, the buyer's account, reimburse themselves. Well, the banks need to make sure, as well as the buyer does, that the correct goods have been shipped and have the opportunity to arrive on time, because they need to make sure their buyer is going to have the money to pay them. And all of this leads to all kinds of stuff in letters of credit, documents that are not actually required in order to do the business, letters of credit that have incredible amounts of details. And we need to think about how do we expedite this process? Well, an expedited letter of credit was created as an initiative of Professor James Byrne, who was the founder of the Institute for International Banking Law and Practice. And his investigations believe that the principle of a simple letter of credit instrument, calling only for the documents that a buyer really needs, is not only the solution, it is absolutely possible for us to do. So how do we do that? Well, we look at the roles again, and we think about what the bank says. Where does the beneficiary have to send their documents in order to get paid? Make this simple. Let's eliminate the idea of this thing called negotiation. That doesn't have to be part of the letter of credit rules. The obligation is to either pay at sight of documents that comply, or give a promise to pay at a later time on a further maturity date with documents that meet the letter of credit. And that can be either with the issuing bank or with a specific nominated bank. Both of these banks could take to honor the documents. Now, if the seller is not really positive that the bank that issued this is a big enough bank for this transaction, or maybe they don't know the bank, or maybe they want a bank in their own country to be obligated, then a bank in their country can be asked to confirm this letter of credit. And what that really means is that there is an obligation of the issuing bank to make payment, and there is an obligation of this confirming bank to make payment. So really the beneficiary has the promise then by two different banks to make payment of the documents. So what's the issuing bank got to do? An issuing bank's obligation are to honor the documents if the letter of credit is available with them. If the letter of credit is available with a nominated bank, then the issuing bank is obligated to reimburse that nominated bank that has honored the documents. And this is true whether or not the nominated bank has advanced funds to the beneficiary, or if they've not done that, the issuing bank's obligation is still there. One thing to remember for all of us in this, the letter of credit is issued by the bank, but the bank is not responsible for the selection of the beneficiary. The buyer, applicant for the letter of credit, chooses what seller they're going to buy the goods from. So the responsibility for the buyer, number one, is to know your customer. The buyer has to know the seller. Again, why? Because letters of credit deal in documents, and the banks don't know who the seller is. They've never had the opportunity to visit their factory or investigate them. So letters of credit deal in documents, and the banks that issue the letters of credit are not responsible for the form of the documents, whether they are sufficient, whether they are accurate, whether they are genuine, or maybe they're falsified, or what the legal effect of any document is. That goes back to the buyers and sellers knowing each other and agreeing on what the letter of credit is going to require in terms of documents. And that should be done before the buyer goes to his bank and asks for a letter of credit. Let's keep it simple. Let's not call for documents that are not required.
Well, and that brings us back to the first question we were asking: how long will this vehicle called letter of credit keep chugging along? Well, as long as we keep on pushing for education and as long as we keep on pushing for simplification. And Don and I have been doing this for years already, as so is the ICC Austria's Trade Finance Week. And I hope we can do this forever, but I hope that sometime we will say, oh, we succeeded.
Thank you, Don and Hugo. Thank you so much for this enlightening presentation. I always thought that the true test, if you understand the subject, is always if you can simplify it. Either simplify the subject to explain it to others or simplify the use of others. And I found this to be true even of today's presentation. So thank you so much, guys. It was, as always, such a pleasure. All I am left to say is, ladies and gentlemen, if you liked what we do, please join us next year at ICC Austria's Trade Finance Week 2022, which will take place in Vienna. It's going to be a face-to-face conference again. So mark the dates in your calendar, and for regular updates, please hit www.tradefinanceweek.org. And also, we would like to thank our partners and sponsors, our platinum sponsor, Raiffeisen Bank International. Thank you very much for the ongoing support, and our partners, the London Institute of Banking and Finance, Coastline Solutions, the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, and of course, our media partner, Trade Finance Global. If you like what we do, please sign up for our regular updates or join us on LinkedIn. Thank you so much, and Dankeschön from Vienna.